Can anybody unseat Forte from the number one spot on our top 25 Kentucky Derby contenders list? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's your boy El Hombre, Trust the Prophets. Matthew DeSantis joins me for another top 25 Kentucky Derby contenders list. And there was some big shakeups this weekend, including some very serious-looking Japanese contingent. Matthew, what's going on tonight, and what are your thoughts on what we've seen this past weekend?
Well, I feel like every single week we maybe talk about this a little bit, but it feels like the more races that are run, the more questions that come up, the more variability there is. You made a comment earlier today on the chat with the other Trust the Prophets guys. It should be the time of year we're consolidating our opinions, but it seems like we're diverging our opinions this year even more, because I think it's in the eye of the beholder and you kind of see what you want to see. But there's a lot of different performances out there that have people scratching their heads, going, wow, being perplexed, being impressed. And so it's a really thrilling time of year.
Yeah, and with as we run through the top 25, we'll maybe talk through a little bit of those differences of opinions that we've had internally here. With that said, let's just jump right in, make this quick. Top 25. At number 25, new to the list this week, Congruent by Tappet, Antonio Sano. Could you give us a clue of where this horse ranks in your opinion, and where he might be headed next?
Yeah, this horse is the question here is whether or not he's going to go to the Derby, because he has maybe borderline enough points to qualify. He ran at the Battaglia, won the Battaglia at Turfway Park, and then came back and did not run particularly well in the Jeff Ruby Stakes. Didn't have as much pace to run into, which was a little bit of the issue. I'm not sure this is a Derby horse, but again, there's only 20 horses in the gate of the Kentucky Derby, so we're making a top 25 list. So some of these horses aren't going to make it there, but he's all through with his prep season, and now it's just a matter of whether or not he and his connections want to make it into the gate.
All right, fair enough. At 24, we have Skinner by Curlin, headed next to the Santa Anita Derby out of the John Sheriff's stable here. What do we have on Skinner?
Yeah, Skinner's one of these lightly raced California horses that kind of flew under the radar because he wasn't a Baffert horse and, wasn't hung up in all the controversy around what barn he was going to go to, et cetera. A little bit of a closer, but does have some versatility to sit mid-pack at least, has some really nice late speed figures. He's a definite contender to keep an eye on out there, that Santa Anita Derby. But he's a horse with very little foundation under him, is a very lightly raced horse. So some of these California horses we talk about later on in this list as well, same thing's kind of true here. There's him, and Go Rocket Ride's another one who similar structure in terms of very limited foundation, but huge upside potential. I think Skinner's one of these big upside type of horses that could, if he pops the second or third, he's right there in the starting gate of the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, it's going to be one of those that if you really like this horse a lot and you get a futures bet, you're out a real long shot right now. So yeah. Interesting. 23, we have Fort Bragg, who actually pulled out of one of the past weekend preps to opt into the Florida Derby this coming weekend out of the Tim Yet Teen Barn. What do we have on Fort Bragg?
Yeah, Fort Bragg, as you said, scratched out of the Sunland Derby. Maybe that was for the best, because that race was just a complete meltdown disaster. So maybe it's better that he's not there, but he's going to have his hands full, obviously, and facing Forte in the Florida Derby this weekend. But again, a horse that, if he picks up second or third, probably is in the starting gate of the Kentucky Derby. You get that 40 or 30 points for finishing third and second. So I absolutely has a shot. I mean, if you look at that field beyond Forte, there's a lot of question marks. Absolutely has a chance to get in there and do well. We'll be breaking from a further outside post, so some questions there. I'm not entirely sold on Fort Bragg as a Derby horse. I never was that high on this horse, but he might just fall into a pretty good situation there at the Florida Derby.
Yeah, I definitely think Teen moving in there shows that he must think that he can at least hit the board there. Yeah. I don't think anybody's planning on beating Forte, although it could happen. But I don't, like you said, underneath it looks pretty wide open. There's a lot of question marks. There's a lot of horses that we've seen big things out of that have not performed so great recently, like Cyclone Mischief comes to mind. But 22, Raise Cane by Violence. Bluegrass Stakes is what I have in the notes here. And the Bluegrass Stakes is looking pretty stacked up if all these horses that are, I guess, targeting that race at this point. If Raise Cane's the first one we're going to mention, but there's several that could make that a big one at Keeneland.
Yeah, it could absolutely do it. I mean, obviously won the Withers last time out and up at New York, but is going 2 turns for the first time. I actually think this makes sense that he goes back down to the Bluegrass because Ben Colebrook is a big time trainer down in Kentucky in that Turfway Park area. He had another horse, Scooby Quando, who actually ran that evening after Raise Cane won the Withers, ran in the Battaglia. So he knows that Kentucky circuit well. Going to take Raise Cane down there. A horse should like more distance, certainly showed it in the Withers, but is a little bit pace dependent, I would imagine, and is going to need a strong pace to run into, which is something we might not get in the Kentucky Derby, but you might end up getting in the Bluegrass. You never know.
All right. Spoiler alert. Number 21 is the first of 2 Japanese horses that made our list for the first time this week. Dura. And I'm going to go Spanish pronunciation versus Japanese because I have no idea how to say Irede.
Irede. Yeah.
Irede. Okay, good.
Yep.
Wasn't
Dura
that,
Irede.
no, I'm not going to take a shot with the trainer's name either, and that's all you.
Yeah, no. Ikazoe he's a very good trainer over there, and Duramente is an interesting sire for Dura Eride. But here's the thing about Dura Eride: obviously, second place in that Maidan UAE Derby performance. And while everybody's going to talk about the winner, and we're going to talk about him here in a little bit, Dura Eride really distanced himself from anybody in third place as well. I mean, he was well clear of everybody else. So that was a very impressive effort. Here's the thing I like about Dura Eride: has won going 1.25 miles before. I know he can do the distance. That's not the problem. So he's a really intriguing horse. You can absolutely do the distance. He broke his maiden on the dirt. He has won a grade 1 on the turf. Very versatile horse. These Japanese runners are going to give us a lot to think about, I think, in the weeks leading up to the Derby.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, depending on where the, the post positions are huge in Kentucky Derby. We all know that, and we will see. I mean, that's the type of horse that could be dangerous if he gets the right setup. Number 20, Jace's Road, a familiar horse to us here, just coming off of, a nice performance, not overly impressive, but where you at on the Brad Cox entry here?
Yeah, I think what we saw out of him is about the type of horse I thought he was, which is like a nice horse. But in this field and in this crop, a nice horse is going to probably get you in the starting gate of the Derby. So, he's a horse that typically needs to be on the lead. He was obviously very forwardly placed, pressuring Kings Barnes throughout that Louisiana Derby, very slow fractions, and still couldn't really close. I mean, was losing ground at the end. So I think there's some distance limitation questions with Jace's Road going any further, because it was hard to go much slower up front than they went the first 3/4 of a mile. So there are some questions there, but he's going to end up in the starting gate in all likelihood.
Yeah, 19 coming out of the same race, Instant Coffee, who was actually finished behind Jace's Road, but due to the more impressive earlier season by Instant Coffee, still maintains a spot on our list. I don't know. I don't know if it's a question of whether this was a one-off bad day for him, or whether that's more of the real Instant Coffee. But go ahead on your thoughts on him.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I are pretty on alignment. I mean, I had him, I think, maybe a little bit lower on my list. I think I had him 23rd, 24th, maybe. But he is, he's a horse that is pace dependent, as we talked about. I think that was evident from the fact that they went really slow up front for most of the race, and he didn't have something to run into. And he needs that. He also is a horse that sits way too far back and is going to face a lot of traffic issues throughout his race. So I didn't love that combination. He's a gutty horse. I think the excuse you can make is this was the first time off a layoff. I mean, he hadn't run since that Lecomte, so it had been a little while. Maybe he just needed to shake the cobwebs up. They already knew they had enough points for the starting gate of the Derby. Didn't really need this race in a lot of ways. Use this race perhaps as a tune-up, but I think anybody who was buying that Instant Coffee stock can't feel too secure about that position anymore.
Yeah, because if traffic and tacticals, placement is a big deal in that race, then it's going to be a bigger deal in the Kentucky Derby, most likely. So,
absolutely.
I'm with you 100%. 18 is Mage, who we'll also see at the Florida Derby this weekend.
Yep.
Gustavo Delgado is the trainer out of Good Magic. What do we have here?
Yeah, so I think Colin Sheehan really likes this horse. I really like this horse too, actually. And I actually think if there's anybody who can beat Forte in the Florida Derby, it's probably Mage. This is a very, very, very young horse. Only has run twice, actually, believe it or not. And that Fountain of Youth effort that he ran last time out, he broke his maiden, goes directly to the Grade 2 Fountain of Youth to run against Forte, finishes 4th that day. Completely respectable performance, I think, and he had a little bit of trouble on the trip. I think comes back another time out, now has 2 races under his belt, has faced this level of competition before. There's no reason to expect this horse can't continue to progress. Delgado's a really good trainer down there in South Florida. Usually his horses start doing better the more they run. So Mage could be a little bit of a shocker, and certainly is a horse that I think is going to make the starting gate, because I think he's going to finish second at worst in this race.
That's what I was going to say. He's the type of horse who's going to have the points to be in the gate, which is, once you get to the gate, anything can happen. Sincerely Rich Strike.
Absolutely. And he's a little bit more of a front running horse. I mean, we talk about these horses.
Yeah, I like Mage.
Closers. He's a little bit more forward.
A must play underneath, at least at the Florida Derby.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 17, Classic Car Wash, who's turning into one of those crafty horses that just seems to be in the mix every time he needs to be, no matter how good the field is or no matter what the surface or race is. So very believable. Another one who looks like he's going to be in the gate for sure, and he's headed to the Bluegrass. What do we have on Car Wash?
Yeah, I think Classic Car Wash is one of these horses. I wonder if the carriage is going to turn into a pumpkin at the Bluegrass, because he's not particularly fast. And his speed figures are not that great. And he's really taken advantage of 2 relatively weak fields at Tampa Bay to accumulate points. And so now he's going to face a much better level of competition at the Bluegrass. And I'm just not sure. I mean, you mentioned he's a crafty horse. He's a horse I think you root for, but I just don't see him in the upper echelon of potential contenders at all.
He's going to have the points to make the gate, I think. So yeah. I don't think he's going to contend to win the Bluegrass. A horse that I think could bounce back is Verifying, who's also headed to the Bluegrass. Out of Justified at Cox Barn. This is a horse I was high on big time early in this season, and he kind of threw a curveball with a terrible trip, and just nothing seemed to go right for him last out. But here's another shot. Bluegrass is going to be a tough field there in Keeneland, and maybe this is his redemption tour. I hope. I'll be rooting for him. But where are you at on Verifying?
Well, here's the thing. I think the Bluegrass potentially sets up really nicely for Verifying, because here's the thing. If you remember about the Risen Star, he was sitting right off of those super hot fractions early. And out of all the horses that were anywhere remotely close to that pace, he was the only one to finish in the top 4. So everybody else was coming from the clouds and passing and coming late. He was the only one to at least keep running on. He had some traffic issues. I think
he was trapped on the rail. He was trapped on the rail by 2 horses that lost pace, and he had more left, but
he did.
By the time he broke free, it was too late.
It was. And I think the other thing is, he's a horse that I just think there's not going to be a lot of pace in this Bluegrass, it looks like. And so I think this is a race that sets up much better for him to do his traditional stalking trip off of reasonable fractions and then launch late. And I think it sets up very nicely for him. I expect a big bounce back effort for Verifying.
Top 15. Let's talk. Cyclone Mischief coming to the Florida Derby. Here's a horse that put up flashy numbers and a kind of a stinker last time out. Right into Mischief. Dale Romans, who's everybody's whipping boy when it comes to the trainer who can't get it done around Derby time, I guess. But I kind of like Cyclone Mischief. He's dangerous in the Florida Derby. Either that or he's gone from the trail. I mean, this is it for him.
Pretty much. And what I'll say is he delivered a stinker in the Holy Bull, and then he came back and ran a pretty respectable 3rd in the Fountain of Youth. And in that Fountain of Youth, what he did was he got on the lead, and he needs to be a horse that's forwardly placed. Now, the bad news for him is there's a lot of cheap speed, and I hate using that term, but I just did. But there's a lot of flashy speed in that Florida Derby. So the question is, does he get sucked up into a pace that's way too hot and burn himself out?
To run against Forte, and that who's going to be in the same, him and Forte, similar style.
Yeah, I mean they could. If he can sit a little bit, then it's fine.
Yeah, that he'll need to, I think, in that race.
Yeah, I think so.
At 14, Disarm, who's new to the list, coming off a nice run. Gun runner, Steve Asmussen. What do you have on Disarm?
Well, Disarm was a horse that I feel like a lot of us forgot about. He was a horse that had a lot of promise on debut, then went to the bench for a long time, came back, ran second at 2 Eagles River, who we're going to probably see in the Arkansas Derby this weekend, who's a decent enough horse, but then came back second off the bench to run a nice second place in that Louisiana Stakes, and was really Louisiana Derby, I should say, and was really the only horse to close on Kingsbarns and make up any sort of ground on the inside rail. Yeah. So absolutely a talented horse, a gun runner. Asmussen's already said they're going to the Kentucky Derby, so he's going to be in the starting gate. And he's a lightly raced horse, not a lot of foundation, but there's talent there for sure.
All right, another one. Arkansas Derby, Rocket Can, who's coming off a couple wins. I don't think anybody can make 2 cents of this horse because, I mean, there's just a lot of different opinions on Rocket Can. I kind of fall in the middle of that. I don't think the horse is a world beater. I don't think he's got the speed, but I also think he's the type of horse that can grind out a good finish every time.
Yep.
So, I mean, where are you at on Rocket Can?
Kind of the same. I mean, obviously winning that Holy Bull with a really slow speed figure number, and then coming back to finish second to Forte, which is, no disrespect there, finishing second to Forte in the Fountain of Youth. I agree with you. He's a horse that just kind of grinds out efforts. He did improve his speed figure by about 11 points by that from the Holy Bull to the Fountain of Youth. So there was some progression there. Important to remember that Holy Bull was the first race off the bench for him. So, he's got the ability. Arkansas Derby is setting up to have a fair amount of speed up front. So again, can he sit a little bit and rate, and which he's demonstrated the ability to do, and then make a move? And that'll be, I think, interesting. But Bill Mott's very high on him, and if there's a trainer that I do trust, it's Bill Mott.
Yeah, I think Rocket Can's dangerous. At 12, Santa Anita Derby bound, Go Rocket Ride, who I think is going to win the Santa Anita Derby. That's just, I saw a lot in him his last time out.
Yeah.
I think he flashed a ton of speed at the end, like he wanted to keep going. And that's what I look for in a Derby contender. And I really like this horse a lot.
Yeah, it's hard not to like this horse, a Richard Mandela horse, and only running in his third career race. And he's got a ton of early speed, but the beauty about him is if you watch that San Felipe that he was in, he wants to rate, he wants to stalk, he wants to press. He doesn't want the lead, though. He doesn't need the lead. So he's not a need the lead horse despite having great early speed. He trains to a target, which I think is always important in the Derby. Don't get sucked up into a speed duel or anything like that. And yeah, he showed a lot of professionalism for his only second career effort in that race. I would expect a continued step forward. And if he does, he's going to run 100+ buyers. So an absolutely serious horse you have to consider here, and a horse you might get a decent price on in terms of futures.
Absolutely. At number 11 is our first point of division that we talked about at the beginning of the show here.
Yeah.
Tappet Trice, who I love. I think Tappet Trice is a top 5, maybe 4 type horse here. The consensus took him out to 11th, which I can't disagree with it. And a big point, I mean, obviously the horse can't get out of the gate, or hasn't so far. If he cleans that up, the horse could world beat. I think that everybody's in agreement on that, at least on some level. But yeah, it's definitely a problem, and that's why he's 11 and not much higher, I think, on this list.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the other side of the coin. I mean, I look at that Tampa Bay Derby and I'm just like, ugh. I mean, it was visually impressive, but it's just like, he can't do that against good competition. I mean, that was not a good field, and he still almost blew it. And it's just like, you can't. I mean, if he breaks that slow in the bluegrass, forget about it. I mean, it's over. I mean, he won't be able to get anything. But I mean, that said, he's in the starting gate of the Derby. I mean, he's going to be there no matter what he does in the bluegrass. So, he's an interesting horse. It's a lot to get cleaned up. Will Pletcher be able to get him cleaned up? We'll see. Yeah. And the other thing, if you remember that Tampa Bay Derby, Louis Saez really had to go. I mean, he was really pushing him.
Oh, run. That's why I liked him. That's why I liked him more than most people, because that horse had to sprint the whole distance.
Pretty much, to make things up. But there's a lot to clean up there, and we'll see if he can do it against a better field.
You're right. If he does that again, he's not gonna make it out of the bluegrass.
Yeah.
He's not gonna win the bluegrass that way. Number 10, Red Route 1, everybody's favorite closer this year so far, I believe.
Yep.
Headed to the Arkansas Derby. The Asmussen Barn starting to look a little better than it did maybe at the beginning of the trail here, but always a factor. I think Red Route 1 is, again, if you believe in closers in the Kentucky Derby, this might be your choice. Where are you at on Red Route 1?
I don't know about him in the Derby, but the Arkansas Derby is setting up pretty nicely for him. 2 things to keep in mind. They're putting the blinkers on, so he should expect him to get away a little bit better than he has before. He can't keep spotting the field 19 lengths like he did last time out and then close into it. But the other thing that I mentioned earlier, there's going to be some pace in this race in the Arkansas Derby. Now, the one question to consider is it's going to actually be nice weather in Arkansas for this race. The last 2 times he did this in the slop. So we'll see on a dry, fast track. How does he actually, can he come from the back on a track that might be a little bit more favorable to front end speed?
It might help him too, though. I mean, he's not getting mud chucked in his face the whole race. I mean, that's what's interesting about a deep closer in the mud.
Yeah,
and you can kind of make an argument for either case. Your case is a good argument too, where maybe he doesn't get that shot to even close up.
Yeah.
Number 9 hit show, the best of New York, maybe, which isn't saying much.
Right.
Out of the Brad Cox barn, he's going to the Wood Memorial. Probably, I mean, the horse has done nothing wrong. Another grinder type.
Yeah.
Will be in the gate. Should be in the gate. Deserves it. What do you have on hit show?
I think you summed it all up in terms of the best of the New York, but I'm not sure how much that means. Got the perfect setup last time out. And, that was, a lot of pressure on Arctic Arrogance, ended up closing into that. It was no problem at all. So, Hit Show's a very, very good horse, very talented horse. But here's the thing. He scratched out of the Southwest right before he ran in the Withers. And so he scratches out of the Southwest and was going to be 10-1 morning line. Goes up to New York and is 8-5 morning line. That just shows you the gap in talent between those two fields. I don't know how good this horse is, but he hasn't done anything wrong. So, until he does, it's hard to really discount him too much or ding him because, he's not beating better competition. He's beating the competition they put out there.
Hey, if you can punch the ticket early on in the season to the Derby with a horse like this, you should. I mean, I'm sure if it was a ownership group really wanting him in the show, that was absolutely the right thing to do, is to go from a 10-1 morning line to an 8-5 morning line to hit the later field. Number 8, Reincarnate. I know this is Collins. I think this is Collins' boy now that Loggins is off the trail, but I'm not positive that's his top boy, but he's up there on him.
He is. And Reincarnate's got, there's some things to like. We mentioned Verifying's troubled trip. Reincarnate also had a very troubled trip in that Risen Star. Ran into a lot of issues. Going to be running in the Arkansas Derby. If he gets away better, we should be much more forwardly placed than he was in that Risen Star, where he was pretty far back. He's got a shot. I mean, we'll see. It's important to remember that Risen Star took place a week after the barn transfer from Bob Baffert to Tim Yakteen. Now he's been in Tim Yakteen's care for 4 or 5 weeks. We'll see. We'll see what happens in this race.
Yeah, I'm interested. And then right next, number 7, Angel of Empire, also in the Arkansas Derby, which that you see 3 of our top 10 in that race, plus a couple more a little bit further down the list. So that's going to be a good race. The Florida Derby, a little bit on the maybe one-sided if Forte does what we think Forte will do. The Arkansas Derby looks pretty like that could be a great betting race, because I think people's opinions are all over the place on these top few horses in that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Angel of Empire obviously won their last race out at the fairgrounds, and actually that was the Risen Star. Reincarnate was in the Rebel. I apologize if I said that earlier, but it won the Risen Star. I know they run the same weekend, both the R's and everything. So, but but Angel of Empire won that Risen Star. Likes more distance. Should like continuing to stretch out. Is a little bit pace dependent. Might be a little bit like Instant Coffee in this regard. Might need a hot pace, but looks like he'll probably get a nice setup there in the Arkansas Derby. So we'll see if he can put back-to-back good performances for a horse that does like to continue to stretch out, for a trainer who has a slew of great Derby horses. At
number 6 is, and I will turn to my international guru on Trust the Profits, Matt, to fill us in mostly on Dermasotogake.
Yep. Dermasotogake is my
monsters.
Ace.
I mean, there was a show-stopping turn, wake up if you were sleeping on the off hours, whatever it was. Undeniable, wild domination by the Japanese all over the world last weekend, by the way. But yeah.
I mean, just an incredible effort in the UAE Derby, handwritten out. I mean, never was shown the crop, and won by 6 lengths over Dora Araday. And it just went wire to wire on the field and just crushed everybody. And it's just so impressive. He's a horse that is going to like more and more distance. So the 1.25 miles for the Derby is not going to be a concern. The biggest question with all these Japanese horses is not their talent, I don't think. The question is, how do they take the Kentucky Downs dirt, and how do they handle all the international travel? Because he's a Japanese horse who went to Maidan. Now he's going to have to come to Louisville. That's a lot to put on a horse. So we'll see. But he's got talent, and the Japanese have been building towards this. This is not Mendelssohn coming over. Like, this is a far different creature, I think, than what we're seeing with what these Japanese are doing. And I like Dermasotogake quite a bit. And I think he's going to be an interesting horse. I don't usually pay a ton of attention to like the workout reports and things like that. I think he is a horse to pay attention to on those workout reports leading up to the Derby to see how he's handling the dirt. How's he working out? How does he look? That's going to be a big question mark about how much of a contender he's going to be, but he's got the talent for sure.
Yeah, it's wild. And that was like at the beginning of the show tonight, we mentioned, the picture got a little less clear because of the Japanese unknown with those two.
Yeah. And the other thing I'll mention is Dermasotogake, if you watch the UAE, he was a front running horse that day. That's not his traditional style. There was not a lot of pace in that race. He took advantage of it. He's normally a mid-pack horse if you go back and watch his races in Japan. So he's got versatility as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like a horse we'll get to in a minute that did the same exact thing in his race here. But Two Phil's number 5, the workhorse so far. I think all season we've been high on him. Yep. He's been in the top 10 for several weeks now for us, and he proved it this past weekend in a field that I don't think a lot of people believed in him. He went off at, I guess it ended up being 5-2, but it was 7-2, 4-1 type odds most of the day. So I don't think a lot of people were big on him, but he did it. He went big. He's been super consistent and maybe just a tick off of these next few after him, but way up there in my opinion.
Yeah, he's really good. I mean, he just turns in really solid efforts every single time. He doesn't run a bad race. You got to love that Larry Ravelli's getting to the Kentucky Derby. You got to feel great for his jockey, Jareth Loveberry, who actually broke his leg 3.5 weeks ago and is now back on the horse. And, he thought he was going to lose his mount potentially on the Kentucky Derby, but he's on the horse. And Two Phil's, couldn't have looked more impressive in that Jeff Ruby Stakes. Looks so good. Now you could argue, well, Turf Horse was chasing him, a bunch of, Turfway Park tour. But here's the thing, that Turfway Park to Kentucky to Churchill Downs angle is a good one. And not just because of Rich Strike. If you just look in general, Turfway Park shippers run pretty well at Churchill Downs. The synth to that dirt tends to be a good transition. I like Two Phil's a lot. He's an honest horse. He's absolutely going to be in my trifecta ticket for the Kentucky Derby. That's the one thing I'll tell you for sure.
Yeah, I don't blame you either. I mean, he has not done anything. Another horse has not done anything wrong, has been nothing but consistent in the top, couple spots, no matter who he's running against. So number 4, Confidence Game, another Bluegrass Stakes. I believe he's headed to the Bluegrass Stakes here. Yeah. By Candy Ride. This is another one that I know you and Colin are higher on than me personally, but I get it at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, he ran in that Rebel and he won. He showed a new dimension. That was, I think, what I like about him is that he had been a horse that needed the lead to win. What did he do at the Rebel? He sat 5th, 6th, 7th early on in that race, then launched late. Great ride by the jockey and great effort by James Graham. Kept him away out of all that mud. It kept him wide actually, and still ended up closing and running really well late. So I think it shows you, the horse can absolutely do the distance. And I think he's a pretty special horse. I don't know. We'll see what the Bluegrass situation, shapes up as. But again, he should be able to have a pretty good trip there at the Bluegrass, depending on who else draws into that race. I think he's a pretty good one. I don't think he's elite by any stretch. I'd put him in the same category as a horse like Two Phil's, honest horse that'll run his race. But we'll see.
Yeah, we'll find out next time out. Like we said, that Bluegrass Stakes is stacking up to be a pretty evenly. I think there's 4 or 5 horses that could be, on favoritism or close. Yep. Number 3, Practical Move, the natural Yakteen horse. And probably, most likely this Anita Derby favorite.
Yeah.
Which, there's, California, we know what's going on out there this year. It's a little bit light, but Practical Move is no joke. No practical joke.
No, he's not. I mean, he's a really good horse. I like him a lot. He's got a perfect running style, very similar to Forte. Can sit kind of right off the pace and then go, and doesn't need the lead, but won't be too far back. Is not a pace dependent horse. It really demonstrated in the San Felipe that Los Alamitos Futurity effort was not a fluke, and easily won that race. And was interesting, didn't attract a ton of money. Went off at 4-1 that day. So, horses like Hijazi that are a little bit flashier, even Go Rocket Ride was taking on a fair amount of money. So he's a
they
horse
went off all around the same price, if I remember right.
They did.
All with 4, 5, and 6 to 1, something like that.
And he's a horse that gets overlooked a little bit, I think, because he is a natural Yakteen and because, people are looking for the flashier horse, but he gets the job done. And I like him a lot. The question is whether or not Baffert brings back, or whether or not I should say Yakteen also brings back National Treasure in the Santa Anita Derby, because he's been training as well. He's not on our top 25 list because he hurt himself. We'll see if he ends up running in that race. But that Santa Anita Derby now potentially with Practical Move, with Go Rocket Ride, with Skinner, and if National Treasure draws into it, suddenly that's looking like a pretty good race too.
Yeah, and that's a good thing because California was looking real thin earlier, just even a few weeks ago. So that's good. It looks like it's coming together a little bit. At 2, maybe a little bit skewed by somebody on our team has had the nerve, I'll mention no names about the formula, has put Kings Barnes all the way up to number 1, passing Forte, a very controversial move, but we like controversial moves.
We do.
When everything at this point has got at least an element of unknown to it. So Kings Barnes was a monster this past weekend. There's no doubt about that, but that's why I think he's up to number 2 on this list. And again, I think outside of Forte, you can really throw, 5 or 6 of these horses in pretty tight quarters for that 2nd through 6. And Kings Barnes landed number 2 this week, way up from last week. So
yeah.
What did you see on Kings Barnes?
Listen, I had him number 4 on my list. I know, just for transparency's sake, I know Colin had him number 7 on his list, a little further down. Listen, it was a very good effort. He ran a 95 Beyer speed figure, but you cannot help but ignore the 1:14.3 opening 3/4 of a mile. I mean, they walked the dog up front in that race. I mean, there was 0 pace. And I don't know what the heck Ricardo Santana Jr. was doing on Shopper's Revenge, because that horse looked like he was about to throw a temper tantrum when he asked him to rate. I don't know why he didn't gun it from the number 1 hole. And Jace's Road, also Florent Drew decided to sit off of Kings Barnes, and he had his way and up front. And then when it came time to kick for home, he opened up at will. So it was a very impressive effort. He's not going to get away with those fractions again, though, in the Kentucky Derby. And he's a very, very good horse. I don't know if he's number 2. Like I said, between 2 and 6, I would say throw a blanket over them. They're all pretty close to each other. So it's a little bit in the eye of the beholder, but I saw some warts in that effort that, I think if people saw it and they saw the front running style, which we talked about, we hadn't really seen much yet on the Derby trail, but I just don't know. Nobody's going to go 1:14.3 in the first 3/4 of a mile of the Kentucky Derby. That's for sure.
To play devil's advocate on that point, though, and what I believe too is that he ran that slow because he could, and he won't get away with it again, but most likely. But in that case, I mean, if he's crawling around there, it's not like you're just going to slam on the brakes for slamming on the brakes' sake.
Yeah.
So he ran the race that was given to him, and still, I mean, he won easily. I think he had a lot more in him. So we'll see. There's a little bit of an unknown because of that. If he had a high pace, or any kind of stressful race going on around him at all, it might be a different story. But I think he has more in the tank and could be even better than that. So, number 1, baby, we'll be seeing him this weekend. Forte down at Florida Derby, and we are stoked to be going. So I hope we run into some of you guys there. Absolutely. But anything to add about Forte going into here? Because, I mean, we've been talking about him ever since the Breeders' Cup.
Yeah. I mean, listen, he's breaking from the 11th post. That is a disadvantage, tactically speaking, because the Gulfstream Park's got a short run into the first turn. And that said, I made the comment in the first look video that I did with Colin. He could be breaking from halfway into the grandstands. He should still win this race. Like he's just the class of this fit. Now, if he runs his race, if he has gate trouble, if he ends up getting, traffic issues, things like those things happen. Obviously, that's horse racing. There's variability to be expected. But if he runs his race, one of the other horses is going to have to take a massive step forward to beat him. So a horse like Mage is going to have to run 10 to 15 points better than he's ever run before in his life to beat Forte. I'm not necessarily
Forte just has a disaster. Yeah, unless he just has a disastrous gate or gets a terrible trip, which I don't see. Because I mean, what do you think? Where does he have to be placed going into that short first turn?
I
Does he
think
have
as
to
long as I think he'll
start
let
sideways to be in the top few?
I know. I think they're going to let some speed go out front.
Okay.
And I
I
think
was
he's
curious.
going to sit. I think he's going to sit like fifth. I think he's going to sit like, yeah, fifth or sixth, second flight. And he's going to just try to tuck in behind that speed, probably in like the 3 path, I would imagine. And because he doesn't need to save ground, like he can do the
No,
distance. That's not
I
a
don't.
problem. So, like, he's just going to let those horses tire each other out. I think he wants to I think he wants to be outside because some of those horses are going to start backing up and you want to be able to go out as they're backing up. And so I think it's going to be, I think he should get actually a perfectly fine trip in that regard. But the question about Forte, which I think will be one that he asks as we look forward to the Kentucky Derby, even if he wins the Florida Derby, is, well, who's he beaten recently? You know, the Florida preps have not been very strong. And, you know, if he wins another
Everybody's
one by
running from him.
yeah, exactly,
That's
5 or
my
6
opinion.
lengths. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I agree. I totally agree. Everybody's ducking him. I think you're absolutely right. But you can look at those running lines and go, geez, you know, some of these other horses have more impressive resumes because they've actually beaten some of these other horses that we think are pretty decent. Forte's best victory as a 3-year-old, his only victory as a 3-year-old, is over Rocket Can, Cyclone, Mischief, and Mage at this point. You know, 2
So
fills
what do
is a
you?
better
Yeah,
resume than that, you know.
yeah. It's what you make of those three, really. Yep. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, let's close this out. We'll keep it short. Matthew, thank you. Anything else before we close it out or no? We good?
No, just excited for Florida. Hope to see some of you guys down there.
Yeah, absolutely. See you guys next time. Good luck this weekend.